we are so very happy to invite you to the African American Film Critics Association Roundtable discussing the incredible documentary John Lewis, Good Trouble, with a stellar, amazing director, Don Porter, the incredible Erika Alexander, who produces this project. Let us introduce you to our members. We have in Philadelphia, Katia Woods. We have in Chicago, Reggie Ponder. In Florida, we have Al McGee.
Hello.
Coming to you from Toronto, we have Miss Carolyn Hinds.
Hey.
In Atlanta, Kim Ford.
Hi.
And Anthony, our movie brother, you are in Chicago as well?
Houston, Texas.
Houston, Texas. Oh,
Yeah.
H-Town. Sorry. And I'm Ronda with Penrice. I'm in Atlanta.
Hello, everybody. I'm so glad that you exist.
Yes, thank God.
We need you.
I've worked in a lot of the places y'all are in, from Philly on, and Toronto. So it's awesome. Nice to see you.
Okay, guys, I get the first question. This is Reggie Ponder, the real critic out of Chicago. And Dawn, I want to ask you first. It seems that you did a short on voting, and now you really kind of expanded it with looking at John Lewis. Can you talk a little bit about your interest in voting and how John Lewis for you played into that? And then I have a question for Eric.
Yeah, absolutely. And hang on one second. Sorry about this.
I want some, Erica.
My background is I'm a lawyer, and I was a political science major in college. I've always been interested in real power for African Americans, and that is the vote. That is elected people to represent us. That is a verb to represent us. So I actually got the woman I profiled in the vote short was just a spectacular sister, Donita Judge, who is the lawyer, and she's not given enough credit for this, who argued and won the North Carolina case that became the model for showing voter suppression. So knowing that, she comes out, she was working with the Advancement Project then, but she comes out of a long tradition that we have from the glory days of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, of people advocating for us and for our rights. So when given the opportunity to make a film about Congressman Lewis, I wanted to both look to the past and show what he had, where he began, but also then look to the present, because too often our leaders are portrayed as being brave, but they are not given the credit they deserve for being strategic. And John Lewis is a political genius. If at 19, you can be part of the group desegregating Nashville's lunch counters, which had been segregated for 100 years, then you move on from that to March on Washington, to the Freedom Rides, to all of the things that he accomplished. That is not just a brave person. That is a person who is able to pick a target and execute flawlessly. And that is what I wanted to celebrate about Mr. Lewis, in this movie, is that longevity and how, I guess the questions are, where do old civil rights leaders go, right? And he went to Congress. So yes, I am obsessed with voting and about how it has been, it is starting to be covered more, but it's very difficult to show people how the vote is suppressed today. When John Lewis was protesting, it was how many bubbles are on a bar of soap, things that were more obvious. Today it's, well, bring your driver's license, when we know from, that many people of color do not have driver's licenses. And so it was excluding older people, very young people. So yes, I am obsessed with voting. I'm still obsessed.
Well, thank you. I know you're obsessed with voting, and Erika, I know you're obsessed with Black Power. Is that you have been? I got to speak with you in Chicago at the Wakanda Con, and you really talked about a lot of things in terms of just owning our own and supporting our own. Can you talk about why this? I know the answer to this already, but can you talk about why this project was important to you and how it really fits into your philosophy in Hollywood?
Well, Hollywood wasn't made for Black people. That's how it fits in. So if we make our way inside of it, it's because we create new paradigms and tear down the old system. It can't stand, it's untenable, it's unfair, and it has nothing to do with our real relationship to culture. We as the 13% or less than the 13% have been the biggest culture makers in world history. That's a fact. The fact that they can devalue us every day and point to what we haven't accomplished in our narrative and devalue it across not only the nation, but then in global market is one of the biggest examples of how powerful racism is. So John Lewis is talking about voting rights and standing for a more, I guess, the definition of what America is supposed to be. And it doesn't get that way because we wish it. It gets that way because we point it out and then we do something and take action in order to realize it. So I figured, I'm not the biggest name in the world and I don't have as much power as I'd like, but with whatever power I have and whatever platform I have, that's what I'm committed to doing. And so I try to do it in my own way. More importantly, I try to amplify the voices who are outside of those resources. And because I think that ultimately that's going to be where the biggest change comes from.
Nobody's bigger than Maxine Shaw, Erika. You take that back.
I have
Pam, you take it back.
That girl is going to have to pay me for renting my face. That's all I know.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Al McGee from Florida with Your Entertainment Ticket. My first question is for Don, then next for Erika. Don, as a film director, and this film, I watched it last night, and I've always been a big fan of John Lewis since I was a kid. But there was one scene in there when he ran against
Julian Bond.
Mm-hmm. And Julian Bond was just so upset because he said things about him and they were supposed to be friends. When you discovered that part, how did you feel about that? And how did you feel more about John Lewis?
I love that question. I thought when we talk about who tells our stories and being an African-American director, I thought, here's maybe something that John Lewis did that we could be really critical of, right? And it is only when we criticize people that we really give them their full humanity, right? Uh-huh. And so I felt like what it actually showed was that John Lewis is a fierce competitor. And when push came to shove, as much as he loved his friend, he really wanted to win. What he actually did was, today we would laugh, he challenged someone to a drug test. I mean, that is the most mild of political scandals I could think of. But it did cause a rift in their friendship and they had to work through it. But, she among us who has not sinned cast the first stone, right? So, but I also thought it was really interesting because very often stories about, civil rights, about Black people are treated in such a one-dimensional way. Slavery ended, John Lewis crossed that bridge, Obama gets elected, and instead of digging into the details. And I thought our stories needed some more fullness. And the third thing I would say is the audience becomes a little bit a part of that choice, because you could look at John Lewis and say, ooh, that was a little, makes me in my feelings a little bit. And yet we all love that John Lewis and we love that he is in Congress. So would we have made a different decision if we're trying to win, and what do we think of some? So I hope that it made him a little bit more complicated for people, and we saw, but I also still think there was nothing that diminished him in my eyes by showing something that maybe was a choice that you could say, oh, that surprised me. And instead of making him a statue,
right,
I wanted to make him a person. So
I totally agree with you, because I remember telling my friends and family about Dr. King and, having, girlfriends and things like that on the side. But I told them he's still the greatest, in my opinion, the greatest human that ever walked this planet, as far as my knowledge from what I know. I totally agree with you. And thank you very much. And it's a wonderful film. I'm doing my review either late tonight or tomorrow on the film.
thank you so much.
And Erika, oh my goodness, I am so glad to see you on my video screen. And I really know you as an actress, but now you are a producer. And you mentioned earlier how Hollywood is really not made for Black people. And you talked about the power and things like that. Now being a producer, will that get you a step closer to get to that power or become of the power base? Because I noticed that the producers are really the ones who really ran Hollywood, or really still run Hollywood.
Yeah, there you go. Mr. McGee, I hope so. I mean, you know what? I think that I've been in this game in Hollywood specifically. I've had my SAG card for 37 years.
Whoa.
It's all I've ever done. Thank you. It's all I've ever done as a professional. I was discovered when I was 14 in Freedom Theater, in a basement theater called Freedom. And Johnny Allen Jr. and Johnny Hobbs, those people are responsible for having trained me in less than 5 weeks to suddenly meet the challenge of a big cattle call audition and then get the lead role out of nowhere. I have to say that part of my training as an actress has been just to pay attention. And I noticed early on that the people who had the power were producers and writers, the creators. The people, producers, meaning they could create and make things, and the writers who could, by virtue of their writing, create things, but not necessarily always have to make them happen. So when I was on the Cosby Show, I saw that if I wanted to be more than what I was, even then I was sort of restless because I was told by my own agent that I would never be an ingenue. I was 19 when they said that. Yeah, I think they were giving me a backhand compliment.
Whoa.
To say that I was more mature and those roles wouldn't come to me. But what they were saying is that I wasn't vulnerable. I would be not the damsel in distress. I would not be Juliet. But what I could be was the foster child, the prostitute, the slave, which I had already at 19 played all of those roles.
Uh-huh.
So I saw that if I wanted to enhance at least my possibilities, I'd have to learn how to write. It took me 20 years to learn the craft and take myself seriously. I didn't have the discipline at the time, didn't know what I was doing, but I did do that. And then ultimately, because I was writing, and you go out and you sell things or try to, and then people give you a different type of racism. They tell you, oh, this is great, we love it, but we won't be able to do it here for whatever reason. And I've had a studio head said that Black people didn't like science fiction because they didn't see themselves in the future. That is a direct quote. So then we ended up making a comic book. That was me producing myself, having to produce a demo and or proof of concept, because so many of these things people say no to. So the production work came out of people saying no and me getting tired of hearing that they wouldn't do it. So I said, well, hell, if I'm willing to write it or be in it, or at least collectively have people who could, then I've got to be willing to find the money or the resources or be a part of the making of it. And so that's where that comes from.
Wow, that's really great. And also those people you talked to, they didn't know anything about the Funkadelics and the mothership, did they?
You know what? How about this? You know what we told them? So in the room, it was me and my creative partner, who was my husband at the time. He's my ex-husband now, but we still creative partners on some things. He had drawn Concrete Park. He taught himself after 50 how to draw comics. And he said to him, his answer to him was, you don't know, but we're the aliens that you took from across the world to rock your world and make your planets twirl. And then he told him about Octavia Butler and Samuel Delaney and the Funkadelic and all these people, Earth, Wind, and Fire, these people who saw the future and put it inside their music and in the
exactly.
their dressing. Look at James Brown, who put music on the one. That's from outer space. We're futurists by nature. And so part of our theme for Concrete Park is the past is painful, the present precarious, but the future is free. And we can always create in the future. So thank you for saying that, because Parliament Funkadelic is absolutely, and by the way, at the time that he said that, Will Smith was the #1 science fiction star in the world. So it just shows you the collective delusion of white people to exclude us.
Well, thank you very much. And you two
Thank
ladies, please stay strong because I love you and I need you, and keep going.
We do. We need you too.
Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Carolyn. I'm in Toronto, and I'm so glad actually that you ended up talking about the concrete part, because I wanted to ask both of you about how film is changing slowly. Like Black people for sure have always been interested in sci-fi. You mentioned Octavia Butler and Parliament Funkadelic, but then you have like Nichelle Nichols, and who was one of the first Black women in a major sci-fi production. And now the way how there seems to be a civil rights movement in entertainment, and the way, and I say that because like more Black people are being more vocal about how they have been treated in the entertainment industry, whether they're writers, whether they're press and journalists, or screenwriters or directors and producers. Like they're feeling more empowered to be more vocal. And it's funny because the film is also about John Lewis, who's a massive civil rights figurehead himself. And for both of you, as Black women and as creatives in the film industry, what is this moment like for you, and what do you hope to see going forward? And because it seems like Black people have never stopped being in the civil rights movement. There was never a time where Black people haven't been asking for equality, haven't been asking for inclusion, haven't been asking for the space. So for both of you, like what do you think about this moment that's happening now, and what do you hope to see in the future? Erika, you can go first since you kind of segued into it.
Sure. Well, I've been hanging out a little bit with Reverend Barber, and specifically looking at his sermons. And he talks about the third Reconstruction that's happening right now. And when you think about the civil rights movement that you're referring to inside of the entertainment world, it's probably very true, because the internet did something that creators couldn't do with the natural setup of the networks. So you have Shonda Rhimes, who came in after I think 30 years and put a Black woman in a drama. And that hadn't happened since Diane Carroll. That was part of the beginning of a new civil rights sort of reformation inside of Hollywood. And thank God for that, because then after that, they started doing more, or thinking and realizing how powerful that demographic was. They gave it away willingly just after Living Single in 1997. There was maybe the Chris Rock show and Bernie Mac, but then nothing else of any significance. And what I like to say is that people like John Lewis understood that the internet, and including comic books and all the speculative fiction, was where it was at. So even March, the fact that he did March and he did his story as a comic book, as a visual representation of his life, brought in a whole new audience. Black Panther, the fact that there's a Black Panther, but the original Black Panther from King Kirby and Stan Lee had to be updated, and to our Black Panther, Christopher Priest did that. Christopher Priest is the creator that came in and modernized and gave us our modern Black Panther. But none of that probably would have happened without all those people who sat there for decades being ignored, Nnedi Okorafor, in the bottoms of Comic-Cons and that type of a thing. So I think the civil rights movement has always been in that, I said, the artist's alley, where they had been writing those stories. Octavia Butler had been writing about us inside of the future and creating that. It just wasn't paid attention to until the internet totally destroyed their, the fact that they could silo us. And so suddenly Fox didn't have a lock on the black viewership, and they're fighting for each inch they have. So even now the Wu-Tang Clan has a series about the Wu-Tang, but because they're trying to get Black men. So all I have to say about that is that I'm glad that everybody is at least understanding the power of the new market. And to your point, even the name Uhura means freedom. So the fact that Gene Roddenberry put that in and named his Black character Freedom, we were always probably going to win a lot more eventually once we started to get out of the locked positions that the networks had us in.
Thank you. Dawn, if you want to, you can also answer the question from your perspective also as a director.
Yeah, there's been, so I'm a member of the Academy, both the Film Academy and the Television Academy. And there's been a great deal of discussion about diversifying and adding new talent. And I'm glad that that discussion is happening, and we do see some modest improvements. But I think it's really, really important that we not take our eye off of the ball, because we have heard this happy talk before. And right now, everyone says they're listening, but there are signs that we could fall back into the same old habits. The entertainment business is a business, and people like to work with people they know. And in our incredibly segregated society, like, we're not always the people that people know. So there's a lot to do with societal integration and respect, and giving kind of credit where credit is due. I know that, as fortunate as I am and as much as I work, I still have situations where I have had to send home people who do not respect me. I can't tell you how many times I show up in a shoot that I've arranged, that I am the director of, and the local, hires who are men and who are white will walk by me looking for the director. And even when I identify myself as the director, they're still looking for the director. So, at this point, like, that's their drama, not mine, because if they don't figure it out really quickly, they're going to go home. But I do think the conversation is important. The conversation is happening. We are seeing more representation. We are not seeing enough. And it is upon all of us. I love, like, what Ava DuVernay does. She puts her action where her heart is. She hires women. She hires people of color. She calls people out. So, to bring it back to John Lewis, when you see something that's not right or not fair or not just, you need to say something. And I think a lot more people need to be saying what they're seeing. How did Harvey Weinstein get away with abusing those women for 2 decades, right? We are seeing people who are, like, really, really racist in the halls of power. And those of us with any modicum of power need to call that out, which is why also I'm so incredibly grateful to you all for being here. I'm not asking you to like my movie because I'm Black. I'd like to know what you see in the movie and what speaks to you, because we need to have a multiplicity of voices. In reading some of the reviews that come out, people will say, there was nothing new in the movie. And I'm like, really? Because that footage was never seen by anybody else. John Lewis told you he didn't see any new footage. So what do you mean new? There, people looking for a scandal, looking for something that isn't there. When I asking, like, well, why did he do this? I'm like, he told you why he became an activist. He hated discrimination. It's just that simple. And we don't have the luxury of choosing to ignore it. And so that very comment, to me, is in itself racially insensitive. If you are a white person, you can choose whether or not you're going to tolerate discrimination. If you are a Black person, that is not our choice, right? So, I just want to bring it back to, I do appreciate having your eyes, and hearing what you think.
No, I appreciate everything you did, because the thing with the film and with someone like John Lewis is I think he's an inspiration for anyone in any industry, because he's never stopped advocating. He's never stopped being an activist. He's never stopped being a civil rights leader. Like, once he started and once he made that decision, he kept doing it. And it didn't matter how, like, he used his position, every platform and every position he got, he used it to benefit of Black people. And I think that, as you were saying, that you hope that what's happening in the industry now doesn't stop, because it's something that has started and stop. And what we have to do is like use him as an inspiration and keep speaking up and not let this moment pass and not be satisfied with the little crumbs that they may give us as to placate us.
And that is, you know, that is the secret to it, John Lewis, is when he was, you know, 17 and wrote to Dr. King to ask to desegregate a university. When he was 19 and he sat in at lunch counters and integrated Nashville. When he was 23 and spoke at the Mercantile in Washington, he was just putting one foot in front of the other. He wasn't trying to make a whole movement. The fact that it became part of a movement is how we look at it today. But what he was doing was what he thought was right. And really, he just, that's what he did. He was one foot in front of the other, but he didn't stop, and he hasn't stopped. So that is definitely what I'm trying to say with this film.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kim Ford in Atlanta. My question is for both you, Don and Erika. First of all, amazing job on Good Trouble. We can never have this story told too many times, so who cares what others says? They've seen it before. Actually, they haven't. And, you know, they've had the privilege of telling their stories a million times and keep winning awards, so who cares what they think? But my question is, given what's going on in today's climate and the Black Lives Matter movement, what's your stance on how that has sparked a call for change and regarding diversity and equity more so in Hollywood, in front of and behind the camera? Because we've seen the letter that went out with so many amazing names, Viola Davis, Issa, so many demanding that these changes are made. So what's your take that some things you like to see change in front of and behind the change, behind the camera?
Well, I mean, I'll start a bit, and you know, one thing I want to focus on is it is easy to believe that we have not progressed, and yet when you are able to say Issa Rae, Ava DuVernay, Viola Davis, Kerry Washington, Samuel Jackson, so Will Smith, right? That's a lot more power than we've ever had. So what I want to continue to see is those folks speaking up, which they are doing. But I think what is very interesting about this time is I do think I see a little cracks in the armor. I see people for the first time, white people saying, really questioning what their part is in maintaining the status quo. And so I think what I would really like to see is people, without being defensive, saying, who's on my team? Who do I hire? Who do I promote? You know, so I'm looking to that. I certainly have been getting a lot of calls about doing things, which I think is helpful and hopeful. I think the next step for Black creators is something Erika speaks to a lot, which is assuring that we own our content, and so that we can exploit it and not be exploited. So I'm looking not for people to like post Black Lives Matter on their corporate websites. I'm looking for them to hire people in meaningful jobs.
Love it. Erika, I would love your take on that as well.
I was writing down some names because she's right about there's John Ridley, there's people like Jordan Peele now and Ryan Coogler and those types, and obviously the people in speculative fiction like Nnedi Okorafor and Sean Martinborough. These people are very powerful within themselves. I think, and have been frustrated with the amount of money and resources given to not only them that are maybe established now, but outside of that. The new voices and the bias that's within the industry, and that goes racism, gender, ageism, and also geography is unacceptable. We have got to look at how much they put in with entrepreneurs. They give less than 2% of all these trillions of dollars to Black businesses. That is, you can't even almost say it without saying that's the most disgusting thing you ever heard. If in 2050 we're supposed to be more than as minorities, they'll be the minority in their country. That means they're not even investing in their own future. Mm-hmm. And it is a global market as well, where they are not the majority. And so we have got to, when people say, oh, why we can have our own all we want, but we're also going after the same pieces of the pie. And there's only so much of that pie. So people get frustrated and say, we need to get our own. Yes, we have billions of dollars, and we need to start focusing those dollars within our entrepreneur system. And that means stores, creators, all those things, people who make jewelry, everything. But also, we need to also demand that they start, and I said these corporations give that money up. I'm sorry, that's just all there is to it. There shouldn't just be one Tyler Perry studio. There should be studios all over the place. Here we have Dr. Dre and all these people who've created billions of dollars for other people. But how many of those studios do they really own? Or did they sell them? Sell their stake in them to other people? I think they bought Essence back, the brother from Liberia. You know what I'm talking about. Richelieu Dennis. Yeah, to get it back. But the point is that there's no sense in owning something that you can't scale. We have to be able to scale in order to dominate. And we've proven how good we are. Black women, how can we be the most educated, the best voters, the most blah, 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 and then the most underfunded? It's an insult.
And my last question is, how did the relationship with CNN Films come about, and what was that pitch to them like?
They came to me. So they had seen some of my prior work, and they had a lot of success with their RBG documentary about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I think they were looking for another charismatic 80-year-old. And so, they asked me, and I was thrilled to accept.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi guys, Kathy Woods out of Philadelphia. I love this film. I'm a huge documentary nut, so I probably see about 100 a year. So what I loved about this film is exactly what you two ladies talked about, is to humanize him a little bit. I think too often we look at people like John Lewis, and I believe, Dawn, you said it, we turn him into a statue. I love the fact that you put his personal life in a little bit in there. I think a lot of people don't know that he was married. Like, he literally, they think he was, like you said, he was part of the Civil Rights Movement, marched with Dr. King, ran for Congress, and this man, it's all he ever did was give to others. But I have to say, my favorite part was his staff talking about his sense of humor and him dancing. For me, that kind of put the cap on it, is that he is more than just this icon, that he's very much in touch, and that he had a lot of younger people working in his office. So my question to you, was that something that when you set out to make the film, was that something that you were like, I really want to show John Lewis the man, not just the icon?
That definitely was in my mind, but really what happened is it's what I saw. So, because the congressman was so, kind of generous with what he allowed me to see, I could show it to everyone else. I think the hardest things for him to talk about were his wife's passing. I think they were extremely close. So you'll have him describing that she loved art, and, we have that kind of interview. But it was very hard for him to talk about that. He did love to show me his art. I mean, he is a big art fan, and he loves music. And I think it's also, when we talk about what's important to show people today, it's that you can both be a protester in the streets and you can dance at home, you don't have to be one thing, and nobody is that intense and protesting all of the time. I mean, I think part of Mr. Lewis's, love of culture is that's what centers and grounds him, in addition to his faith. I think it's first faith and then family, but then also the calm that he's created around himself with beauty. But he knew those artists. I think he has the largest collection of Jacob Lawrence original paintings probably in the United States. He knew Romare Bearden, he knew Charles White. So thinking that those were his peers and that they taught him to love art, just was something, I think it's not something you necessarily would know about a John Lewis, because it's not something that he speaks about all the time. So I loved finding out those details about him. But I will also tell you, he is quite a gentleman, and he goes to Costco. Because every time we would go to his house to film, he would say, I have muffins and, you know, drinks and things. And I would say, Mr. Lewis, please do not go to Costco for me. But he's just a real, he's a very, very kind person. So it was a joy to be with him.
That comes across in the film. It was, you can tell that a lot of love, and he's surrounded by love. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Hi there, Ant here, the Movie Brutha. I have not had an opportunity to screen the documentary yet, but like Katya, I'm a huge fan of documentaries, probably my favorite genre, so I'm very excited about everything that I'm hearing. In particular, you know, sounds like how you guys humanized Congressman Lewis, because, I mean, I'll speak for myself personally, you know, growing up and, you know, hearing about these, you know, different civil rights figures, they were portrayed almost like superheroes, and, you know, it creates such a big separation of like, I could never, right, do these things. But my question to, and either of you can answer this, is prior to the documentary versus going into it, what was the most profound or interesting, or I don't know, maybe surprising thing that you learned about Congressman Lewis that you didn't know?
I'll start. I mean, I think for me, it's exactly what you were saying. We do a disservice to our leaders when we deify them this way, because then no one can live up to that expectation. And knowing, to me, it's more powerful knowing that he is a person with, you know, flaws and doubts, just the way anybody is. But I think the thing that was most striking is he's very quiet at home and very calm and very peaceful person. He's not a person who gets, you know, kind of messy and is looking for his moment in the sun. He would be really content, actually. I think he would be more content to stay home. But he is driven by, he knows kind of the power that his speeches have. So, you know, I think also what struck me was we have a scene where we take him back to his hometown of Troy. And he's, you know, he always mentions that his family still owns that land. And, you know, there is, you know, for so many Black people, I grew up in New York City, so we didn't have our land, you know, and I think for John Lewis, he knows where he comes from. And I think that helped ground him and fortify him when he was out doing these dangerous things. So I would say, you know, sometimes you don't want to meet your heroes because it kind of disappoint you. But with him, he exceeded my expectations in that he is just as you see him in public as in private, except that he's really, really funny. He's so funny. He loves, like, you know, teasing people in a kind way. Last thing I'll say is, all during the making of the film, we filmed for about a year, and all during that time, you know, something would happen with the current president, and I would say, oh, Mr. Lewis, I'm so upset about this or that or the next thing. And he would say, yes, yes. And then he would say, that's why we're doing this. And he would kind of steer the conversation to something productive. And, you know, the takeaway for me as a younger person is, don't focus on what the chaos is. Stay in your lane. Focus on what you want to achieve. And so my husband started calling him my life coach. And in a way he is, because he's just not doing that for show, you know. He's like, this is how he lives his life. So I hope you see the more private side of him, but understand that he's both things. He's that fierce public presence and also the quiet, loving brother and boss. So.
That's awesome. So you guys, you're the next documentary that I'm screening. I'll be sure to tag you in my review. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I hope you enjoy. We have quite a bit of him campaigning in Houston for Colin Allred and for Lizzie Fletcher. So we followed him around to Black churches during that time, and we almost could not keep up with him. So hopefully you'll see some places that look familiar when you screen.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Hi, it's Ronda. You first came on my radar, Don, with Spies of Mississippi. I went to Ole Miss for grad school. And so in looking back at doing that documentary to now and seeing the changes, how do you mark your progress as a director and documentarian and correlate it to what's happening right now?
Oh, that is a good question. It's funny. I actually started Spies of Mississippi was the first film I ever started, but I couldn't get funding for it. So that's changed. And I was looking the other day because we got a request to relicense that film. There's a lot of interest in that film now, which is great. But so I looked at my emails back from 2010 and where I was begging here, there, and everywhere for somebody to give me money to show this piece of history. So it is still difficult to sell historical films. So that has not changed, but what has changed is because I've made so many films now and, have a track record of getting them finished. I mean, just getting a film finished is a track record, let alone whether it's successful, but getting them finished. So I'm able to work with bigger outfits, with graphics and musicians. Tamar Kali did the score for for John Lewis movie. She was the composer for Mudbound. She had just worked with Dee Rees, who is somebody, I adore her talent. And so for Tamar, yeah, exactly. So for Tamar to come from that to agreeing to do my documentary, when you work with great talent like that, it really helps you push your game too. I also have a lot more control over who I film with. So I film with two cinematographers, Keith Walker and Tony Hardman, both African-American men. And I also have a lot of good relationships with white cinematographers, but I will tell you, when Tony Hardman filmed all over Black churches in Houston and nobody even noticed he was there, and he was there with a big giant camera, he understood the respect you give to the sanctuary, never approached any place else. He also had I just think the appropriate reverence for what we were seeing Mr. Lewis out there in Houston working his little tail off to get first time Congress people elected meant something to him. And I think someone said you see the love on the screen. That love comes not just from me, but from the people who filmed him. So, that it's important to me, no matter what race people are, but I do enjoy working with these two gentlemen quite a bit, to tap into people for whom they're going to give that extra because these films mean so much to them. So, I love my job. It has a lot of headaches. It's not easy to release a movie in a pandemic. But I think also over the years, if I look at all the projects, what they all have in common is kind of elevating details that you may not have known about people. And so I feel really lucky to be able to work through all my problems in movies.
And Erika, how did you guys connect? How did you become a part of this?
Sure. It's a long, short story, but I had been campaigning for many years for different candidates. And I met with my surrogacy for Hillary Clinton, everybody you could possibly meet, especially Black. She had a very powerful contingent of Black elected officials and also organizers around her. So then over the years, I, of course, got a chance to campaign with Congressman John Lewis, Ayanna Pressley, and Stacey Abrams all at the same time. Stacey Abrams and Ayanna Pressley had been very impressive young women inside of their own districts and in Georgia and in Boston, but they had not yet come out on the national scene. And they put us all together in Georgia in 2016. And it was a master class about how to be young, gifted, and Black and political in the South, with John Lewis teaching us how to do it. We went to churches all day and we stayed with each other. And I gained an understanding looking at these two women who were eventually going to be in elected politics, and the way they held themselves and how they really could command an audience, with a man who, when people came, the waters parted, and yet we went up and down to every place, church basements, sanctuaries, wherever you want, outside, to spread the good news and ask people for their vote. And from there, I met his constituent services rep. Rachel O'Neill is the tie that binds me and Dawn together, because eventually, I didn't know it then that I would be asked to be a part of the documentary, and then find out that Dawn was doing a documentary herself on John Lewis, and she was so wonderful and generous to invite me and my partner Ben Arnon at Color Farm to link together to make one. And so that's how that happened. And people say that Black people don't collaborate. That's not true. We did here.
Yeah, we want to thank you, Don and Erika, for this beautiful gift about this iconic man in our history. And yeah, we appreciate you. And we definitely appreciate this movie, this documentary, because it will provide lasting evidence as to the contributions that Mr. Lewis has made to our community in particular, but to this country overall and to the world. Yes. So on behalf of the world's largest group of Black film critics, we thank you. We will continue to support you, uplift you as you continue your creative journey.
Thank you.
And thank you so much.